With just over 100 days until Election Day, a series of national and state polls show Joe Biden expanding his lead over President Trump. The most recent survey is from ABC News Washington Post, and it has Joe Biden with a 15-point lead over Mr. Trump among registered voters. It is now the fifth consecutive national poll showing the 45th president is falling behind. I want to bring in CBS News' Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Welcome, Anthony. Great to see you. So let's talk about where things stand now, starting with the president's comments this week about vote by mail, because he has often said he thinks there are problems with it and that he's against it. And here's what he said about vote by mail in the Rose Garden earlier this month. Let's listen.
I'm very worried about mail-in voting because I think it's subject to tremendous fraud and being rigged.
Is this concern political? Does he think vote by mail advantages Democrats? And Anthony, what are we seeing in the polling that suggests how this plays out?
Well, Tanya, I'm glad you raised it, because how people vote, the way they cast their ballot, might be the most important thing this year. As far as vote by mail is concerned, it's very, very widespread. That's the first part of context that we should emphasize here. There were, according to the Brennan Center, 30 million mail ballots cast in the midterms. There are most states, 30 states, in fact, that allow at least some form of mail balloting without an excuse. So it is very widespread. And quite frankly, it doesn't necessarily advantage either Democrats or Republicans. There are states that use it that vote Republican that the president won, and there are states that use it heavily that Democrats have won. But one of the things that's really pertinent this year is, do people want to vote by mail because they're concerned about the coronavirus outbreak? And in our polling, we see big differences between Democrats and Republicans. If you look at the folks who think that it should be easier to vote by mail, number one, Democrats are 3 times more likely to say that they think it should be easier. And the more concerned you are about coronavirus, the numbers go up for people who actually want to vote by mail. One of the things that will be interesting is, do Republicans then start to receive the president's message? We've seen in our polling that although most people say that they'll vote the way they always have, so people who voted by mail in the past largely say they'll vote by mail again, there are relatively more Republicans who now say in these Sunbelt states that they might consider switching to voting in person than Democrats are. Well, that opens up a question. If people are concerned about the virus come November, does that switch the advantage, or does that give a turnout advantage to either party? I think that's going to be one of the enduring questions going forward, Tanya.
And Anthony, you often say a poll is a snapshot in time. And of course, as you know better than anyone, polling is not perfect. But what does 5 of them showing the same thing tell you?
Well, it's not perfect, of course. Nothing I know is. But the reality is it's really, really good. A lot of people look at the 2018 midterms when the polls were really good in both the House races and the Senate races. And quite frankly, even though we will bring up 2016 many times, the polls were moving towards Donald Trump. And we reported that as the election drew closer. A lot of people thought that he could win, even if a lot of people didn't think necessarily that was going to happen. Well, one of the things I always emphasize when you look at the polls is, number one, look at consistency. Yes, if you see a repeated number of polls in many aspects of science, including in polling, repeatedly seeing the same measurement over and over again leads to confirmation or leads to confidence that something is happening. But I will also say, for context, too, you look at these national polls. Number one, it is not a national race. It is an electoral college race. That's one of the things that we can always do a better job of emphasizing after the last presidential election. And the other thing is that 15 points, well, in context, that would be a much higher number than any recent presidential election has been decided by. You're really looking at 5 or 6 points, maybe something even closer. Last time popular vote within about 3. So you see a poll like that, and you've got to think to yourself, well, it'll probably tighten up. It'll probably tighten up because this is something we haven't seen in like 30-odd years, and that just doesn't seem too likely.
Right. Well, I'm curious, though, who is the president losing the most ground with? Or is it, is this more about Joe Biden gaining popularity, or is this more about people becoming more determined to just not vote for President Trump. What are these numbers telling you?
Every election is a mix of a lot of things, including the things you just mentioned. So we do see a sizable number for Joe Biden who say that they're mostly voting against the president. And that number is relatively larger for Biden than it is for Donald Trump. Donald Trump supporters are more for him and enthusiastic about him. That's one key difference. But you asked about these demographic groups, which is often a way that we can slice and dice the election outside of attitudes. And we see a couple that you want to keep an eye on. One of them is the split between college degree holding voters, in particular women who hold college degrees, who have been trending towards the Democrats in larger and larger numbers. Joe Biden right now is doing by double digits in a lot of the states that we've polled, better than Hillary Clinton did among that group. You also want to look to some degree at seniors. In a lot of the polling recently, ours and others, some of the gains that Republicans usually run up among seniors are being diminished. That could be a result, in fact, the question suggests that is the result of the president's perception of his handling of coronavirus. And so that's one of the things to keep an eye on, too, because, of course, seniors, we always know, turn out in large numbers, Tanya.
Right, and they are being overwhelmingly affected by this virus. All right, well, Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.